Welcome back to Vital Signs. We're going to shift gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk today about occupational health and safety regulations with our legal expert, Jason. Welcome back, Jason.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me. I'm Jason Desouza. I'm the founder of Desouza Injury Lawyers. Our principal office is in San Antonio, and we have clients all over the state.
Jason, what are the most important OSHA regulations that small businesses must comply with?
Well, so OSHA is the federal agency. It stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And I would say that instead of looking at it like what is the number one most or number two most important regulation that any business should follow, because it's any business, not just small business, is be careful who you contract with. So I think on an earlier segment we had talked about I have a principle in business where not all money is good money. Just because there's money involved doesn't mean that I necessarily want that money or that I want to be involved in that type of deal with that money just because the money's involved. So the reason that's relevant is to any business, be careful who you contract with, because there's a lot of bad actors out there who they regularly violate safety regulations. They regularly have numerous deaths that pile up on their job sites. They regularly don't follow their own safety regulations. There are bosses out there who frankly could care less about safety regulations or safety equipment or safety gear. So I'd say all the OSHA regulations matter. You know, it's kind of like if you were to ask somebody, well, scratch that. I think all the OSHA regulations matter, and the reason all of them matter is that every regulation can be tied in to another regulation. I tried to think of an analogy. I don't really have a good analogy to give you, except all the regulations are important regulations. There's no one that's supremely more important than the other. Now, the reason that ties into be careful who you contract with is because if you go and contract with a bad actor, let's say you're in the oil field, or let's say you do production in the oil field, or you do cementing in the oil field, or you do workover rigs in the oil field. If you decide that there's a company out there who can either get you a job and they're going to pay you a lot to get on this site, or there's a supplier that you can hire and they're really cheap for you to get on this site and it would make sense to get the job by hiring them, I would say buyer beware, because it's very easy to look up any company's safety regulations or safety certification, safety history with OSHA and find out what their record looks like. If they're an unsafe company, you don't want to do business with them because you have no idea what regulation that company is going to violate, and you don't want to be left holding the bag. Because if somebody's injured on that oil field, when those lawyers come knocking on the door, as they always do whenever there's an oil field injury, you don't want to be the one left standing when the music stops. And that bad actor who you contracted with because they were either a cheap supplier or they offered a really good contract, they're going to see you, and if they have a chance to throw you under the bus, they're going to do it. We see it all the time. All the time we see it in litigation where a small company will show up and they'll try to do work in the oil field, and the big companies throw the little guys under the bus all the time. Every time, without fail, it's as predictable as the sun coming up and sun setting in the day. So I would say be careful who you contract with, and you could verify that by looking up their safety record. You don't need a lawyer to look up a safety record. If you know how to look up the weather on your phone on Google, you know how to look up a company's OSHA safety record. It's very easy.
Wow, that's a lot. How can businesses stay updated on changes in health and safety laws?
Well, OSHA offers an OSHA 10-hour course, and in that course, you can go to it, somebody at your company can go to it, and all it is just like a refresher course that you can attend and go to OSHA and become OSHA certified. Now, if you believe that that is just too much for you, or it's too much of a burden, or you don't have the time for it, or nobody in your organization is qualified for something like that, you can always bring in an outside consultant. Whenever we file suit in commercial lawsuits against oil field companies or trucking companies or company vehicles, for example, one of the things that we always look at is what is their level of training and retraining of their employees to make sure that they're following the best standards in the industry. And I think a company that has a consultant that comes in once a year and teaches employees and talks to employees about good safety processes and good reporting and hours of work and stop work authority. Stop work authority is a big deal. If you empower your people, your employees, to know that you care about the safe environment in which they operate, then they'll be empowered to operate a safe environment. They'll know that the boss cares about a safe environment, and they'll know that the boss wants a safe environment to happen. Because then if something happens, the boss can always show up and say, hey, come on guys, we have a safety plan in place, we have a safety consultant in place, we make sure to do the safest things all the time. How did this happen? And that way you can determine, I had mentioned this in an earlier episode, you can determine whether this is a system failure or a person failure. And if it turns out to be a person failure, you can find out how that person failed and why they failed. So I think it's real important to hire a consultant. Just bring them in once a year. All of the drivers, I'll give you an example. At my law firm, for example, they're required to do biannual driver testing, in-car driver testing. Just like when you were 16 years old and you had to sit in the car and do the testing, I require anybody who drives a company vehicle, every 6 months, they've got to go through a period of retraining. And they find out the safest way to drive vehicles, the safest way to operate vehicles, the optimal speed to drive, the best routes to drive, basically how to be a safe driver whenever you're driving the law firm's vehicles. And I think that the people that you have on your sites as a business owner, the employees that you have on your sites are your representatives on the ground for what kind of business you're actually running. And to show people what kind of business you're running, it's best to bring in an outside consultant and show them.
Interesting. What are the consequences of non-compliance with OSHA standards for a small business?
Well, again, just like any business, whether you're a small, medium, or large business, the consequences for non-compliance with OSHA only show up when you've got an injury on the site. And let me issue a warning to all business owners about OSHA. Let me tell you what OSHA is all about from the perspective of a plaintiff's lawyer. If you have an injury on the site, if you're in the oil field or you're in the trucking business that caters to the oil field, for example, I'm just going to use the oil field for this example. If there's an injury on that site and OSHA shows up, OSHA is pointing the finger squarely at the business owner. They're not pointing the finger at anybody else first, apart from who the employer is of the injured person. The first place they always go is they blame the employer, because the employer had access to training of that employee, the employer had access to control over that employee, the employer had access to safety gear over that employee. The employer is the point of contact for that injured or dead employee. So the consequence of non-compliance with OSHA for any business is you're going to be fined by OSHA, and they'll determine the amount of the fine. And those fines, from what I've seen, are not small. I mean, I regularly see, for small, minor, so-called minor injuries, I regularly see fines of about $40,000 to $45,000, depending on how the violation occurred, because what they really want to do is they want to send a message to that business. So that's why it's so important to pick who it is that you contract with. Because if you're going to go and contract with an unsafe company and one of your people becomes injured, you're going to take the hit. You could point all day long to that unsafe company, but it's not going to matter if it's your guy who got injured. Now, that's consequence number one, is fines. Well, consequence number one is your people get injured or killed. I mean, that's terrible. No employer, no boss ever wants somebody who works for them to ever be hurt or injured or killed, God forbid. And that's number one. That's the first consequence. Second consequence is the OSHA fines. The third consequence is, and again, it happens all the time, OSHA may decide that they're going to bring in other federal or state agencies to investigate this injury and this non-compliance. So an example, because OSHA frequently gets involved in the oil field, so I'll go back to the oil field. If you have a case of water contamination and an injury resulted from the workover rig. So they were repairing the drilling rig that goes into the ground to drill. And if a worker became injured or killed, and as a result of that injury or death, the rig contaminated the water. Well, guess what? Now you got OSHA involved, now you got TCEQ involved, and now you may even have the EPA involved. And now you got 3 agencies, 2 are federal, a third one is a state agency, and you could very well have more federal agencies that get involved to figure out what happened. Now, again, going back to the OSHA fines, not only will OSHA fine you for the unsafe conduct of that workover rig while you were drilling near the water aquifer, but OSHA could also turn around and bring in TCEQ, who regulates the state water system. And they could hit you with a remediation fine, meaning you've got to go fix it. You broke it, you buy it. And you have no idea how much groundwater you may have contaminated. You could be looking at a fine of, maybe as small as drilling a new well, which is $35,000. Or maybe you've got to remediate the entire aquifer, and you could be looking at millions of dollars. Who knows? But again, it's just that important to make sure that you are contracting with good people and not bad people. Because when things really go bad, if you're contracting with bad people, you're going to get a bad result.
Thank you so much for that valuable information. I know it is a convoluted thing. So how can people reach out to you if they're interested in learning more or they have a situation such as this?
Yes. Well, of course, you can find us at our office in San Antonio. But just because we're in San Antonio doesn't mean that we don't represent clients all over the state, in Dallas and Houston, San Antonio, down in the valley, all points in between, Laredo, everywhere. You could find us if you go to Google, search up Desouza Injury Lawyers. You could look for us on Facebook at Desouza Injury Lawyers. You could find us on Instagram at Desouza Injury Lawyers. Also, if you want to shoot me a text because you may know somebody who's been injured, feel free to text me or reach out. My cell phone number is area code 210-591-9777. Thanks for having me, Jen.
Unfortunately, all good things come to an end, including this show, but we will be back same time, same station next week. See you then.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.